You're doing really well, I have to say. In some congregations, people can't stop themselves. They start talking. In 1 minute, we'll do the flower communion. I want you to imagine yourselves for a moment in Prague, Czechoslovakia. I should say Prague, Czech Republic. Who has been to Prague? Okay. And who has been to the Unitarian building there? All right, let's start. This is the story that is the story of the flower communion. The Prague Unitarian congregation is located at number 8 Charles Street. In Czech, that's Karlova 8, Karlova being the Czech word for Charles. That building is known as Unitaria, and that is what it has always been known at ever since Norbert Čapek moved into it. It's a building that was restored with a great deal of love and care over many, many years. Now, Norbert Čapek began life as a Catholic. He was born in Bohemia, so we might say that we're descendants of Bohemians. Bohemia is one of the provinces of Czech Republic. He was born there in 1870. And as he grew up, very poor, in a very poor family, he was a Catholic. As he grew older, he joined a Baptist church and became a Baptist minister. It was while he was a Baptist minister that he thought about going to the United States for more education. And so he moved to New York City. Well, he moved to New Jersey and New York City. And it was there that he met he went with his first wife. He had 8 children with her. Her name was Marie. And after she died, he married a woman named Maya, who was also Czech, who was a bit younger than he was. They settled in East Orange, where he became, I should back up a bit. She apparently introduced him to the Unitarian tradition because she'd been in the States longer than he had. And they became very involved in it. They moved to Newark, where he served as the minister of the Orange congregation, which is still going today. In 1922, I believe, they moved back to Czechoslovakia, to Prague, and they started the Unitarian congregation there. Now, Unitarianism had not existed in Czechoslovakia before the Čapeks brought it there. Yes, it existed in Romania, but not in Czechoslovakia. They launched it together in 1922, and for the next 20 years, they managed to create a thriving community of people who were stepping out of many other religious traditions, Catholic, Reformed, Baptist, and so on, much the way Unitarian congregations in this country are run. And up until 1942, they were very, very successful. They got that building in downtown Prague. They now have a second building, which is around the corner from the first. Their worship services are now held in the second building, not the first. And when the Nazis moved into Czechoslovakia, all hell broke loose. The Unitarians were considered the radicals relative to other religions. And Norbert Čapek was eventually arrested by the SS and transported to Dachau along with one of his daughters. He was arrested on the charge that he had been listening to foreign radio broadcasts, which was a capital offense. And so they took him away, and after mistreating him in, I'm sure, rather unpleasant ways, they finally executed him in 1942. His spirit did not die, however. I'm not sure if the congregation came to a halt because of his arrest or if it managed to continue, but I'm guessing that because of the threat of imprisonment, that it probably stopped meeting. Maya had been ordained herself in 1926 as a minister, and she had gone to the States on a tour to raise money for more work on the buildings in Prague. She couldn't come back. Norbert had the choice of leaving Prague as the war was breaking out, but he decided to stay with the church. And so she was in the United States, and while she was there, she settled in at the North Unitarian Church in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where she was the minister for 3 years. They were the two who came up with the idea of the flower communion, and they came up with it because of the differences in their congregation. You know that on our money in this country we have a phrase that says e pluribus unum, and you know what that means, yes? One out of many. This is really the guiding principle of Unitarian congregations. One congregation out of many different backgrounds. And if you look at the website for the Prague Unitarian Church, you will see right across the top of their website, one place, many paths, one goal. And so they too are creating an unum out of a pluribus. You might be surprised when you see their minister on their website. His name is Peter, and I met him last January in New York. He's very thin, very, very thin, and he has a very long ponytail that goes, I would say, at least halfway down his back. He plays the sitar. He went to, I believe it was Meadville Lombard in Chicago for his training, so he does speak English. And the services in the church are done in Czech, but you can get an English summary of each sermon if you go to visit, and everyone is welcome to go. It's become very popular in this country for American Unitarian Universalists to go to Romania and visit those churches. I don't think many people go to the Czech congregation at all, and it's a pity. It would be a great thing to see what goes on in there. So Peter told me, when he said that he was the minister of the Prague congregation, that he had an office there, and I said, was it Norbert Čapek's office? And he said, yes, I have his desk. And I thought, that's sort of like sitting, this will sound strange, it's sort of much like sitting at the saint's desk, We don't venerate relics in this tradition, except that we do. We have different kinds of relics. And the flower communion is a celebration of a relic in a way, a service that started almost 100 years ago that we still celebrate here. One of the few sort of sacramental occasions that we have in our tradition. And it came from the desk of that man, Norbert Čapek, where Reverend Peter now sits. I thought that was quite amazing to see that and to hear that. Oh yeah, I sit at his desk. So another thing to consider is when I've talked about St. Patrick on St. Patrick's Day, I mentioned the fact that Unitarian Universalists do not have saints. Not saints with capital S's, but saints with lowercase s's. And we all have the ability, and we are encouraged to be saintly to the degree that we can. I'm not saying we need to be perfect. I'm saying a little saintly. Norbert Čapek clearly was a man who was saintly in his doings. He was I think by the time he died, he had 10 or 12 children, and apparently he was a great father to them. But he never stopped working. He never gave up his pulpit. He did not leave when he could have left and saved his own life. He stayed behind with those he served. He was a profound believer in what he was doing, and as Linda said, he wrote at least 90 hymns and many prayers, and we'll be using some of them in a few minutes. If you have an opportunity to go to Prague, I hope you'll go and visit the Prague Unitarian congregation. If you can't get there, I want you to go to its website. All I did was Google in Prague Unitarians, and up it came. There's a video on there. It has an English, you can look at it either in English or with a Czech voiceover. And it tells you about the church and what its goals are, and it shows you some archival photographs of the congregation. It's really just a lovely thing to see. It's a nice introduction to another place to go for a Unitarian service. So, one place, many paths, one goal. Now, the flower communion has lived a long life, as I said. It has never gone away since Maya introduced it to the United States. She was the one who brought it here while she was on that tour, having left her husband behind. Norbert Čapek had felt the need for a symbolic ritual that would bind people more closely together. The format had to be one that would not alienate anyone who had forsaken other religious traditions. The traditional Christian communion service with bread and wine was unacceptable to the members of his congregation because of their strong reaction against the Catholic faith. And so he turned to the native beauty of their countryside for elements of a communion which would be genuine for them. This simple service was the result. It was such a success that it was held yearly just before the summer recess of the church. The flower communion was brought to the United States in 1940 and introduced to the members of the Cambridge, Massachusetts congregation by Maya Chapek. Maya was unable to return to Prague due to the outbreak of World War II, and it was not until the war was over that Norbert Chapek's death in Dachau was revealed. From this beginning, the service has spread to many of our Unitarian Universalist congregations and has been adapted along the way. And if you've been in other congregations where this is done, you know that there are different sequences for gathering the flowers, handing out the flowers, the hymns that are sung, and so on. Originally, people were asked to bring a flower of their choice, either from their own gardens or from the field or roadside. When they arrived at church, a large vase stood waiting in the vestibule, attended by 2 young members of the church school. Each person was asked to place his or her own flower in the vase, and this signified that it was by his or her own free will that he or she joined with all the others. The vase that contained all the flowers was a symbol of the United Church Fellowship. Now, I wonder how large that vase was. I'm thinking it must have been enormous because that congregation ended up having at least 3,000 members. Can you imagine? 3,000, 1,500, 100 flowers in that would be quite a lot. The young attendants helped with the arrangement of a bouquet, and they later carried the vase up to the front of the auditorium and placed it on a table there. Dr. Chapek then said a prayer, after which he walked over and consecrated the flowers, which I'll do with his words, while the congregation stood. The 2 attendants then took the giant vase back out into the vestibule, and after the service, as people left the church, they went to the vase and each took a flower from the vase, other than the one that he or she had brought. The significance of the flower communion is that as no 2 flowers are alike, so no 2 people are alike. Together, the different flowers form a beautiful bouquet, and each flower makes a beautiful contribution. Our common bouquet would not be the same without the unique addition of each individual flower. And thus it is with the church community. It would not be the same without each and every one of us. Thus, this service is a statement of our community. By exchanging flowers, we show our willingness to walk together in our search for truth, disregarding everything that might divide us. Each person takes home a flower brought by someone else, thus symbolizing our shared celebration and community. This communion of sharing is essential to a free people of a free religion, and you can only imagine what it meant in a place like Prague, Czechoslovakia, which had been the scene of a great deal of religious persecution over the years, the scene of many different wars throughout European history, and so on. And so, the consecration of the flowers. I ask that you close your eyes for this while I read his words. Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these, thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us, amid diversities of knowledge and of gifts, to be one in desire and affection and devotion to thy holy will. May they also remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing, and of sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of the most precious gifts. May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us or sully our relationship, but may we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world. And now it is time for us to share in the flower communion. I ask that each of you in turn come forward up to one of the vases, quietly, reverently, with a sense of how important it is for each of us to address our world and one another with gentleness, justice, and love. I ask that you select a flower different from the one that you brought with you, that particularly appeals to you. And as you take your chosen flower, noting its particular shape and beauty, please remember to handle it carefully as though it were a child. It is a gift that someone else has brought to you. It represents that person's unique humanity and therefore deserves your kindest touch. Let us share quietly in this Unitarian Universalist ritual of oneness and love. And so, Hank, I'm going to start with you. Would you come up and take a flower?